I work with a parliamentarian that does a lot on immigration, so migration, and has now just been promoted to Secretary for State for Education. So it's a difficult position to be in sometimes, because you have to find your voice in a very nuanced way, and particularly being a Christian within a political system, as it were, with friends on the opposition as well. And I want to start actually with a few phrases that have been bandied around a little bit, and you often see them on Twitter, and they tend to go like this: and people who live in glass houses should not throw stones. And that is a very worthy statement, but also it can be posed sometimes to say you're not supposed to say anything at all, because all of us have problems, all of us at times are hypocritical in what we're saying. But does that mean I should never make a judgment about something as well? And the other statement sometimes we hear is, sometimes, well, we should just pray for that. I don't mind you praying for this situation, but you need to separate yourself out from your worship of Jesus and your political role. That's often banded out as well. Or just pray for it, but please don't talk about systemic injustice. Don't talk about economic inequality. Don't talk about racial systemic inequality. Because that's too difficult. That's not what we should be really focusing on, and certainly not you as a believer in the political system. And that's very difficult, because for me, my faith and my work are very much entwined. I don't think I would be in the role I was in if it were not for my faith. And that brings me a situation where I feel I care very deeply for the people that I want to be a voice for, and I have the pleasure of advising a senior politician on as well. The other problem we have sometimes is the timing of when we speak out. And that's a question I often ask myself as well. When should we be vocal on Twitter or Facebook? And we've had many conversations about that already today. And that can be really difficult, particularly when you're in a position where you're not supposed to necessarily be the person talking, and you have to be very nuanced in that discussion. I want to relate that actually to something that's not political. And that's in my role, often I play bass guitar in my worship team. And being a musician, you know a lot about timing, and you know a lot about tempo. So if I were to come in and play on every song loudly, it wouldn't necessarily do anything for the song. It might be the wrong rhythm, it might be the wrong key, it might make a lot of noise, but it won't necessarily say anything useful to the song. It might be a distraction. If I don't play anything at all, then what am I there for? I'm just on a stage surrounded by great musicians doing nothing. So the timing, the tempo, the rhythm, and the nuance of each note is really important. And I think that is something I carry with me into politics as well. And I feel like we have lost that ability at times to be both believers and in the political spectrum, at knowing when is the moment for action, when is the moment for nuanced conversation, and when is the moment to just pray and reflect, or to step back. And through what we've seen lately, whether that's the Black Lives Movement and what's been going on there, or whether it's with refugees and asylum seekers, coming in at the right moment is so vital. Otherwise you just make a mess of things, or you don't do anything and people call you impotent. And it is really difficult. When you speak out, you will always put yourself at risk. I remember my father once saying to me, please don't get involved in party politics, because when you're up front, you will get shouted at, essentially. Everybody hates you. We've heard that as well. And it's true. They do. Everybody hates you. You have to grow thick skins, but you also have to hold at the heart a sense of what is right. If I don't call anything out, if I don't ever call something to be accountable, then what really am I doing? Am I bringing a change in culture? As someone once said to me, it was a sermon we had on a Sunday, and they said, if the church is never speaking out about culture around us, then what is the church for? If we're not shouting about inequality, if we're not talking about subjects like women's rights, or if we're not speaking out on behalf of the voiceless, those who are the most vulnerable, what are we for? Who are we pointing people to? Are we just another TED Talk? Are we missing the nuance of the kingdom, of the gospel, at the centrality of all we do? And that really sticks with me every time I try and do anything politically. It's also dangerous. We've heard things about nationalism and faith, or putting things out there and people saying you shouldn't be speaking. But again, there's nothing wrong with critical thinking. In fact, my whole job, actually, particularly now with my boss being promoted, as it were, is to be devil's advocate. It's to come up with critical thinking. It's to say, okay, you're amazing, but what about this, this, and this? Occasionally, I may even say that the opposition have a good policy, or I may be really critical about it, and I would expect the same to me. I would expect our policies to be critiqued and costed, and for people to say where we get it wrong. And likewise, that is my duty as a Christian working in politics, is to critique and to hold to account. And if we lose that, what are we? Are we in fact post-democratic? Are we post-truth, as has been talked about as well? And then there's the other thought, and that is, we can speak about truth without integrity. You can say something that is true and not necessarily believe it. You can say it because it's a good media headline. You can say it because it's going to win you friends on Twitter. You can say it because it fits you into the right space or the right bubble. But if there's no integrity behind it, then what actually are you living for, and what actually are you speaking out about? Are you going to actually cause a lot more mess than perhaps for just not saying anything at all? I work in the migration space primarily and on refugees, and that can get incredibly toxic. The other weekend, there was a problem where a person was, he stabbed somebody who turned out to be someone with real mental health issues, who was also here on a resettlement program. The other Sunday, we had another experience of that, where some people who had been housed had mental health problems and weren't properly looked after, and then ended up stabbing fellow asylum seekers. Before the news had even broken, people had made up their mind about that situation. Judgment had been cast, glass houses had been broken, stones had been thrown, and they were all demonized. We shouldn't be housing asylum seekers. They are illegal. They are invaders. Look, we told you this would happen. Nothing about mental health. Whereas we see attackers who have been white before, and the first question is, oh, they must have had a bad upbringing, or oh, maybe they had a mental health problem. So much grace shown to those of our own privilege and background. But what about those different to us? What about those that make us feel complex or awkward? And that's the question. When the media headline is invader, how do I respond to that without feeling a sense of real anger, but also not losing my own personal integrity in that? We've also seen headlines around BAME communities and COVID-19. There was a report that was leaked and then published that showed the majority of doctors in this country who have died from COVID are BAME, and that's Black and ethnic minorities. The people who are on intensive care are ethnic minorities. And the report said itself, this is most likely the result of racial injustice. Why is that? Why are BAME communities the first people to suffer? Why are they the people in housing estates that burn down without any assistance? Is it wrong to call that out? And that's the question. And it shouldn't even be a party political question. So often you hear that put into a box of left or right. If I speak out about economic or racial inequality, am I a lefty liberal? Or let's put it more rudely, I'm a communist. If I speak out about economic wealth or prosperity, am I always on the right? Am I a conservative? No. There is somewhere in the middle. I should care about all. And in fact, James in his book tells us we should show no favoritism, no partiality. We should be caring about the whole. Everybody is born and made in the image of God. And that's that, really. I think we start and end with that. Everybody is born and made in the image of God. And that is what should really drive us when we are putting things out on Twitter or in the media and trying to hold to account. Justin Welby, in his book Reimagining Britain, wrote a chapter on asylum and refugees. And one of his main purposes in that was to basically say, we've got to watch our language. He said, we must resist and turn back the worrying trends we are seeing around the world towards seeing the movement of desperate people as more of a threat to identity and security than an opportunity to do our duty. He goes on to say, refugees, like all people, are treasured human beings made in the image of God who deserve safety, freedom, and the opportunity to flourish. Jesus commands us to care for the most vulnerable amongst us. And really, that's where I want to leave this and say, if we are not caring for the most vulnerable amongst us, if we are not being nuanced in our conversations, watching our words, if we're not holding one another to account, iron sharpening iron, then what are we doing and what are we here for?